All right, so hello everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We really appreciate having you guys here for our Sustainable Broomfield meeting at the Broomfield Crescent Grange here. We have some really cool presentations tonight, some on bees, some on the community garden, and then also on our compost club. So we will just go ahead and get started with that. And if anybody hasn't already signed in, we've got free water bottles, free LED light bulbs, and a raffle drawing. So if you'd like to be entered for that, it's a really cool basket of zero waste prizes. So it'd be awesome. So I'd like to introduce Eric Smith first up to come and talk to us about bees. And he is the president of the Colorado State Beekeepers Association. So thanks for coming, Eric.
Well, I'm kind of a winged, spontaneous type of speaker, and I had this bright idea. Instead of thinking of all this knowledge and getting like a fire hose and being tangential, like I normally do, I'm going to actually try to pay attention to my audience and see what's working for you guys. This will be like brand new for me.
Sounds good.
So anyway, I thought maybe I'd start with the life cycle of a queen and then a colony and then beekeeping in this area. That would be my outline.
Sounds good.
So the queen is just a normal female egg when she starts, but they're deciding to make a queen, so they feed her royal jelly the whole time, and she develops faster. A queen cell is like a peanut. So she is hatched out at 16 days. And if there are other queen cells around, the normal thing is for her to chew a hole in the side and sting her rivals so that she doesn't have to fight them. That's a little less risky, I think, because there's only one queen in a hive. That's what they say, but I've heard that there's 20% of the time there's two queens. I found that to be true sometimes myself, especially a mother-daughter, but I won't go into all that. So she has to go out and mate in her first 10 days of life. And these numbers are not totally accurate because my memory's not that great as much as I've studied all this stuff. And she goes to a drone congregation area, and the boys, the drones, they don't have a father. They're just made out of the queen's genetics. When she doesn't fertilize an egg, it becomes a drone, and he's got one purpose in life, which is to mate with a queen. And we don't have any tender ears. When he's mating, he goes to a nearby drone congregation area because he's saving energy, and they kind of buzz around from 50 to 150 feet high, and they know why they picked these areas. They've never seen it before. You know, this is their first year on life on Earth, and yet they go to the same areas year after year. So they know something we don't know about what makes a good one. There's people taking drones as unmanned aerial vehicles now, trying to put a little queen pheromone lure and find out where are these drone congregation areas. And so this is an interesting new area.
Drones to find the
Yeah, so they're calling them unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, so that you don't get the two kind of drones confused. They'll put a queen scent and a 20-foot tether, and then they're able to photograph where does it attract a little comet of drones. So this is a brand new thing. Julia Mahood has started that, and she's even created a website. So if someone has a drone or an unmanned aerial vehicle, or knows somebody like my husband, he's got the drone, they can go looking for this, and when you find them, you can map them on her website. It's kind of a cool thing. So the queen doesn't then if they fail to find a queen, then they go back to any hive and refuel and go out again several times a day. If they succeed, they mount the queen, they come from below, and they have these big eyes on their head, and their endophallus goes where it's supposed to go, and then they just kind of get paralyzed, and it snaps off, they fall down and die. That's their purpose in life, if they're successful. And if the queen mates with many they used to say 15 or 20, but now they're thinking it could be more than that. could go out on one mating flight or two or three. And then she has all the semen that she's going to need, millions of sperm for her whole life. She has an organ called the spermatheca, which keeps these sperm alive. A queen can live, in the olden days, 4 or 5 years, but nowadays that's rare. Commercial beekeepers are sometimes replacing their queen not only every year, but maybe twice a year. There's reasons for that, but I won't go into that. So anyway, she goes back to the hive, and she doesn't leave the hive again until it comes to the point where she might be leaving with a swarm. That's another part of the story. So it's dark in there, and the other bees, all the work is done by the female bees. The drones don't do anything, and they can't sting either, by the way. But the worker bees can't sting. The queen can sting more than once. She has a smooth stinger, but she usually doesn't sting people. She just stings these rivals when she's first born. So she is an egg-laying machine. They feed her the rest of her life. They clean cells, and then she sticks her head in, and with her legs, if it's a small cell, she'll fertilize that egg, and it becomes a worker. If it's a big cell, she won't fertilize the egg to become a drone. So they only make drones in the summer, especially when they're getting ready to swarm, or when there's a lot of resources coming in. So when it's time, when the hive is getting ready to swarm, which is this time of year, between mid-April and mid-June, really, we're about 3 weeks late this year. But it's a fabulous nectar flow this year. Last year, not so much. I'm maybe gonna be driving to Walsenburg to get more honey supers because everything is filling up.
What's a super?
And I don't want to miss this flow.
What's a super?
Okay, so
And we could walk over there and take a look at them if you want.
maybe we can do that later. But there's a larger box called a deep. It's 9 5/8, and then anything you put on it is called a super. Some people like to have 2 deeps for their brood nest, and then above that is for the honey. And there's an old thing that I'm getting away from, shallows. But the point of having all deeps is if they're like 90 pounds if they're full of honey. So that's too hard. So they came out with some shorter sizes, 7 5/8, and then 6 5/8 is the medium that I'm going to. Then 5 5/8 is the shallow. So the bees tend to fill that up with honey. There's something called a queen excluder to keep her from laying eggs out there, and I've got lots of them, but I stopped using them. I just figure I'm smart enough that when I go through it, I do it painstakingly, frame by frame. Take it and shake the bees off, brush them off, take it to a place where other bees can't get in, an empty box and has a bottom and a top. I do that frame by frame, and if there's brood in it, I just leave it there, But anyway, I got a little distracted. Where am I? So they're when they pack up the resources and they need more room, that's when they swarm. It's usually an overwintered hive, the second-year queen. But a lot of people have been buying bees, packaged bees, or nucleus colonies called nukes, and they are swarming too this year. It's just that time of year. And as president of the state beekeepers, I'm also active swarm chaser. And
So people can call you?
yeah, so the way it works is this: there's a lot of ways that people can get swarms. You can get them from your friend, the beekeeper. You can try to get your own swarm, and then you can call the state hotline, 1-844-SPY-BEES.
There's a hotline?
Yeah,
Sorry,
it's a hotline.
interesting.
It didn't, yeah. I even know a history of this, but I'm not going to go into it with you. But so then there's next door and other things. I went to get a swarm from the state hotline one time, and there were these ladies wandering around in bee suits because they heard about it on next door. But the state system, 1-844-SPY-BEES, They, in the last few years, have created this thing where it used to be that you tell them the first two letters of the city you live in, but there's some cities that have the same first two letters, so now it's going by zip code. And there's a local club that's a member of the state beekeepers, and that club has a swarm dispatcher. And so my club is Westminster Beekeepers. Greg McMahon has got an email, the Bee Guru, and he wants me to text him in the morning, swarm ready. And then he sends a little he sends a little acknowledgement, some little gif, like okay, or something like that. And then I'm ready. I've got all the stuff in my car there to go catch swarms. I've got a bucket on a pole and boxes to put them in that are ventilated, and a vacuum, a bee vacuum.
A bee vacuum?
Yeah.
A vacuum vacuum?
I could show you, any and all this stuff, but I didn't plan on a big show and tell.
Sure. Is it a good thing for the bees to be swarming, or
yeah, that's the way that. I'm glad you asked that, because that's their reproduction. A bee can't live by itself.
Yeah.
A few days and it's gone. It needs a colony, and so the colony. I'll talk about swarms then.
Okay.
So this is the next time that the queen leaves the hive, is when they're ready to swarm. And she's not in charge. A guy named Tom Seeley studied a lot about bees out of Cornell, and he wrote a book called Honeybee Democracy. And my wife gave it to me as a gift. I read the thing. And the queen needs to get down to flying weight again, because she's got a huge abdomen. Her ovaries, it's all big. And so they fill up the cells that she would normally be laying in with nectar, and they chase her around the hive for a couple of weeks, and she loses a third of her weight. So she's getting ready to go. And I'm going to come back to this in a bit, but the bees do different things. They have every job there is in the hive, and when they get older, they're the ones that you see out flying around on the flowers. And they're the ones that know where things are. The younger bees have never left the hive, and they're just like sheep. They don't know anything. But when a swarm leaves, they want lots of those young bees, because they can make wax for honeycomb. They can feed the brood, and you need those to go with you. So these older bees are checking for a place to live, and they also decide when it's time to go. And they get the bees to leave. The queen is not the greatest flyer, so sometimes they'll leave the hive, rarely, and come back because the queen's not with them. Or they'll be on the ground nearby. Well, it's usually close. It's usually 250, 500 feet. They'll be gathered somewhere around the queen, and then when they get in that ball, you've probably all seen the picture, then the older bees are looking for a permanent place. And it's just the cutest thing, because they find a place and they go in and check out part of it, and it needs to be about a 5-gallon bucket size. And they like a small entrance, and then she'll fly away a bit and kind of orient to it, fly back in and walk through a different place, and then she gets back to the group of bees and reports with a waggle dance, like they report where food is. She reports this nest site, and her degree of enthusiasm is noticed by others who will go check it out. And after a few times of doing this, then she just gives up. She quits. But if the other ones continue on, yeah, this is a pretty good site, then it's kind of like a contagion, and there's competing sites, but the one that's most persistent with the most enthusiasm, that's where they go. So in this area, it could be under a shed, it could be in the eaves, a soffit, or the newer homes have columns they built where they don't close the top very well. So there's a lot of places like that, and the beekeepers don't want to be responsible for their bees going into somebody's building, because the beekeeper will come get the swarm for free if it's on a tree or a bush. It's free bees to them, and keeps it out of someone's building. But once it's in a building, it takes some effort, and so they charge for a removal. And I had to do a removal here at the green one time, at the Grange, because there was a pipe where a gas line or something came out, and the bees that were here, they weren't mine, it was my predecessor. Think those were my bees? Yes. Anyway, you have to cut a hole and take the comb and the bees and clean it up and stuff it with fiberglass. And I'm not a carpenter or builder, so whoever's building it is has to get someone else. And it took the Grange several years, but didn't they do a beautiful job? This siding is not something you can go get in the lumber store. So they found it somewhere and made it look like it's supposed to look. So anyway, that's about bee swarms, I guess. And the wild swarms only have about a 25% chance of making it in the wild. And so I think I'm doing the bees a favor. I've kind of got this shift in my mentality about the bees now.
So when they swarm, are they all leaving the hive or some are left behind?
Thank you for asking that. Usually more than half leave with the old queen.
Okay.
But before they leave, they've got all that honey and nectar and pollen, and they've made some queen cells. So if a beekeeper says, well, it can't be my hive, I've had this like several times this week, you know, or go, well, let's look at your hive and see if it's like that. Well, there's so many bees. Well, there's all kinds of capped brood, and if you miss it by a few days, they'll have torn down the queen cells, and they've only got a virgin running around in there who's not going to lay eggs for a few weeks. So then the beekeeper calls the bee supply company. Oh, my hive is queenless. I don't see any eggs. So one guy, to be or not to be in Littleton, he used to try to tell him about, give it a few weeks. And then he just sells them a queen now. Just got tired of telling him over and
Which will make them the money.
But there is a virgin running around, and the queen cells are torn down, and all that capped brood is hatched, so it doesn't look like your hive swarmed. A few days later, you know, there's so many bees, but gosh, I don't have a queen. That's what the beekeeper thinks. But if you get right in there on the day of the swarm, I've showed a few people, you know, take it apart. There are the brood nest things full of nectar. There's the queen cells all around 6, 8, 12, 20. It's an opportunity. You can make more than one hive if you want to. You can take a frame with those queen cells and some resources, some brood, capped brood and honey, and make a whole different colony at
Wait,
that
Eric,
point.
what are you saying? I hear cat food. I don't think that's what you're saying. Cat food.
Capped brood. I've got hearing issues too. So
I keep
hopefully,
hearing cat food.
yeah, capped brood. So anyway, so the colony behind hopefully will successfully requeen. It happens about 80% of the time, or so they say that they requeen themselves. And the new colony's trying to build a comb, get resources, and make it through the winter. So I think when I catch a swarm, I'm already giving them a drawn comb and some resources. I have honey to feed them, and I've got artificial pollen patties to feed them. So I think I've really increased their chances of surviving when I get the swarm. So that's kind of the life of the queen, and I'll just talk about the life of the bee real quickly. She's an egg for 3 days, and there is a pest now called a varroa mite, which crawls in there with her just before they cap it on about day 9. And she has a son, the varroa mite, and he fertilizes his daughters with his sisters. So at the end, the bee hatches and the mother mite comes out. They call her the foundress, and maybe 2 fertile females. And the male doesn't leave, he dies. So she's ready to go right back in and do this to another one. Well, the mite gets on the pupae, which looks like a little cutworm, and chews a hole and starts eating, taking resources. And I think it's about the size of your fist. Some people say larger, but about that big of a parasite. But in the adult bees, there are these, I think it's 6 or 7 abdominal sections. They get right between the plate. It goes with the fat body. And people talked about it like it was just like some vague bunch of fat, fat body, but it's actual organs equivalent to the liver. And the bees need to build that up to get through winter. That's a whole other story. Maybe I'll get to it. But that's what the mite targets is taking this fat body for its own nutrition. So the bee is weak, and the varroa mite doesn't kill the bees so much, but there are also viruses that they carry, and that's what will do it in colony for sure, because it's just like a mosquito disease. The bees get these deformed wing virus, Israeli acute paralysis viruses, like viruses, virus. There were no mites in this country until 1985. And there's been a whole lot of work done to try to figure it out. Commercial beekeepers in other countries, the bees just died down, and the bees that survived, it was the live and let die thing. They're kind of resistant. They know how to deal with the mites. And I think on the other hand, the mites that were too virulent, they didn't survive because they killed all the bees. So it became kind of a balance opposed to parasite in other countries. This country, the beekeepers thought, we gotta bring our bees out to the almond pollination, and we got all these pollination contracts and litter. So they wanted to keep them alive. So they found different ways to fight the mites, but the bees weren't really learning anything themselves. So there are a lot of bees that need help to stay alive in the face of mites. That's a whole other story. Like there's a Zoom thing for beginning beekeepers. No, I'm not going to it, because I've done it, and whatever. So anyway, the worker bee emerges. Forget about the mites for now. She cleans the cell that she came out of. She starts cleaning other cells and feeding larvae. And they get royal jelly for the first 3 days, and that's it. Then they switch to something that's inferior. Otherwise, they would become queens. If a hive's suddenly queenless, and they look around for the youngest eggs or larvae and start feeding, they can make an emergency queen by just changing the diet. But meanwhile, the worker does all these in-hive things for the first 3 weeks. I mentioned that before. She will clean cells, feed brood, make wax. She'll transfer food from the foragers into where it needs to go, pollen and nectar, ripened nectar, and there's a specialized caste, undertaker bees that carry out dead bodies, guard bees that you see, and then it's time for her to learn to bring in resources when she gets older. And there's glandular changes and physical changes when they go from nursing bees to being a forager, and they can change back if they have to. If they lose a lot of bees in the hive, or if they lose a lot of foragers, the hive bees, the nurse bees can become precocious foragers or vice versa. And with the mites shortening the life, that's what happens sometimes. So anyway, she needs to learn where her hive is, and she'll leave the hive and then come back. And this time of year, a lot of beekeepers are posting videos of hives with bees swirling around in front. It's not robbing, is it? And it's young bees orienting. And in the summer, she works out collecting, and they have 2 big compound eyes and 3 ocelli that are single eyes, and they can detect polarized light. And that's part of the way that they determine how far they've gone. And and they may be able to detect magnetism under the ground as well. So they learn to orient and tell the other bees where the resources are, but they literally beat their wings to death, and they usually last about 3 weeks once they're foragers. But in the fall, they have the resources to make it through the winter. They need the brood nest, strangely, is just close to our body temperature. That's the temperature they need to raise larvae. And that's a whole other thing about maintaining the hive temperature. They can bring in water in the summer, evaporative cooling. If it gets too hot, a lot of bees will go out of the hive, and it's called bearding, just stand there. It's something they do that's really funny that nobody knows why. Sometimes you'll see a group of bees, and I think it's almost like watching the people doing calisthenics or yoga or something. They're spread out on the front, and they're all kind of doing the same thing, and no one knows why. But anyway, in the winter, they have to heat up the hive for the brood nest, and they use their thorax as just the muscles for their wings, and they disconnect the wings and basically just shiver and huddle. And depending on the temperature, this cluster of bees, it goes from comb to comb, but it's kind of a ball shape. And the ones in the center are shivering. They'll even leave some vacant cells in the brood nest so that a bee can go in and keep the surrounding larva warm. And they have little air passages that they just make up. It's like penguins, if you picture penguins too. You're on the outside, you're cold. After a while, you go into the inside. Some of the ones on the inside come to the outside. And depending on the temperature, it's big with more ventilation, or it's real small and really tight. So there's a lot more about winter clusters, but they generally, like, I could talk about Africanized bees. They don't have to deal with storing honey for the winter, and they swarm a lot. And that's swarming a lot, and they have a faster gestation period. So the faster gestation, and when they swarm, there's a broodless period. These are good mite fighting techniques. So I don't want to promote it or anything, but they do fairly well against the mites, the Africanized bees. But I bought some bees from, you may or may not have heard of Buckfast Abbey, and this whole system of bringing in lots of different bees for their desirable characteristics and getting them on. The Abbey now is not doing that in England, but there are several places following those methods. In a company, Randy Weaver in Texas, is following those methods. The Africanized bees came in the 90s, and people were saying, "Oh, don't get Weaver apiary bees; they're hot," And he says that he took the mite fighting things and then worked to breed out the defensiveness. And I got some of his queens, and they're doing well against the mites, and they're not nasty Africanized bees. So he must know what he's doing. I've been buying.
Bees live?
Pardon me?
How long do the worker bees live on average?
Well, they live about 6 weeks during the summer, but during the winter they can live 5 or 6 months because they're not going out. When they start to forage, that's like the end of their life, and they don't do that in the winter.
So are worker bees continually hatching in the hives?
Yeah. And so I'll tell a quick aside is what I was doing was bringing in Russian bees, and I think this is an interesting little story. When they built the Trans-Siberian Railroad, and I don't know the time, but it was over 100 years ago, beekeepers in the Ukraine moved beehives to the Primorsky province, which is right across the ocean from Japan. Little did they know the mites host is Apis cerana, the Chinese bees, and that's where the mites came from. So the Ukrainian or the Russian beekeepers had no clue at that time. There was 100 years of those bees getting used to how to deal with mites. So when they hit the United States, we had a guy named Tom Rinder at the USDA Baton Rouge who was looking around the world for bees that could resist mites, and he found these bees, and he went to that area, and he selected some genetics, and he brought them to an island, and he quarantined them, and put Italian bees, which is the most popular kind around here. I'll mention that real quickly. There were bees millions of years ago that found fossils, but they were died out, and some of the early settlers had problems because they needed bees to pollinate the crops. So they brought over German bees, black bees, and they're kind of nasty. Then in about 1850, people started switching to Italian because they build up quicker, they're gentler, they make more honey, and I'm not a big fan because most of the areas that I read about, there's a honey flow and then there's a dearth all summer long. And the Italians just keep making bees, and you've got to feed them or they're going to starve. Or if they built up a lot of honey and you didn't take it, they're going to eat it all. But the Russian bees are carniolans, Ukrainian bees. They keep a real small brood nest over the winter, real small cluster, but they'll explode when resources start to come in. Just lots of bees, and then when the resources stop, they stop making baby. They scale right back down.
So are ours Ukrainian or Italian?
Well, some of those are swarms that I caught last year, so who knows? But anyway, I tried to bring in Russian bees. The last part of the Russian story is that they formed a Russian Honeybee Breeders Association, and they're not the only queen breeders association, but each member had 2 lines. They had 17 lines. Each member would keep 2 lines and then give his best queens in the spring to all the other members for their drone areas. So he's selecting for the best of his 2 lines, but he's got the drones of all the other members out there from their best queens. So I had confidence in that, and people would say things like, "The Russians, they're nasty," blah blah blah. Well, it turns out the hybrids, I buy Russians, they replace their queen, she mates with whoever's out there. Those are the ones that are nasty, but not the pure Russians. I haven't had any trouble with Russians. Anyway, they have that 100 years of dealing with mites head start. So
Can we go take a look at your bee boxes over there?
sure.
Awesome.
I could show if I have some equipment. If anybody wants to see a bee box, bee vac, I'll show you that.
Sure, we could show. Yeah, look at that real quick.
I made for catching swarms.
Oh, that's
It's got ventilation, so it seems like these are the easy swarms that I don't get anymore. He seems to give those to less experienced people. I get the ones that are 20 feet up in a tree, but if you have them on a branch, you can just put it under and shake, and boom. But I'm not getting many like that. And this is the bee vacuum, which is just...
That's like a normal shop vac, right?
Yeah, it's a normal shop vac except for one thing. I put this in there so the bees aren't all on the bottom, they have something to climb on. And this is the original input. If you could see, the bees would hit that little angle, and that would be probably fatal or not too nice. So I put in a different input right here that goes straight down in, and then I use this one to decrease the flow so that they don't get full suction. I'll do full suction if I think I need to, but otherwise I'll try to tone it down a little bit.
When would you need full suction?
Well, I've had a lot of extensions, and I'm up there and they're not really going in like I want them to, so I'll increase the suction. So then, this is kind of a surprise. I've learned the bees can overheat easily, so I'll kind of shake them, and while they're in there, I'll quickly put this on. so they have some ventilation. And it got real ugly a couple weeks ago, so I've learned to put this right by the air conditioning in my car.
Nice.
Yard. And then I try to go for the drapes, with this, because they don't get the luxury of ventilation. So
Yeah.
that's that stuff. I'll go into the brood nest and I'll find a frame that has open larvae, because I'm looking for nurse bees. They're not going to be up in the honey so much on the foragers. And I'll take the frame and shake it here. And then I was worried about, they're all going to fly away. Now, the ones that are flying away are the foragers. The ones that don't know where the hell they are the nurse bees, because they've never been out of the box. And I'll take a cup of bees, put them in here, and then put in a little dollop of sugar, powdered sugar, and shake them. And then, after about 50 shakes, shake them out here, and I'm looking for the mites. They're little dark things, a little smaller than sesame seeds. So,
Why the powdered sugar?
pardon?
Why the powdered sugar?
Well, I was just told to use it, but it's supposed to make the mites lose their grip on the bees so that they come off. That's the idea. Body with the lid. And these are movable frames, and that's a whole other story with foundation. And this product here is called propolis, and it's a Greek word, means before the city, and it's tree sap, and it has medicinal and antibacterial properties, just like the honey. So we give the bees all the credit for that, but I want to give some credit to the trees and the plants, because they came up with these antimicrobials in the first place, but the bees know how to use them. This is an inner cover, outer cover, and I might have a bottom board, a screen bottom board. Which the idea is that if a mite should lose her footing, she's going to slip through here and she won't get back. But if a solid bottom board, then she can crawl back on another bee.
Do they fly at all, or do they just crawl?
They just crawl, and they're blind. They all go. The mites go by smell. So the bees would go in there on a solid bottom board, and any mite would just hitch another ride. And by the way, as part of the state beekeepers, I brought a lady who presented about making nucleus colonies for overwinter. That's a whole thing I guess I'm not going to talk with Brianna about that a little bit. I'll mention it at the very end, or maybe now, but sustainable beekeeping. Anyway, then I had a lady who's it's interesting. She's an interesting lady named Dorothy with an EY Morgan. She's started keeping bees in 2010. She was a female wildfire fighter in Alaska before that. And she knows about inseminating horses. So inseminating bees, she went the other extreme, and she learned how to, Purdue University had something called mite maulers or mite biters. You might have heard ankle biter bees. And these are bees that know how to groom the mites off. See, a lot of people are looking for bees that can detect a mite in the cell, uncap the cell, take out the bee with or without killing it, and the mite. And that interrupts her brood cycle. These are called hygienic bees. But this Dorothy Morgan is looking for bees that will damage the mites. So she has to take a bottom board and a 500 power microscope and look at these little mites for damage. If they get a leg bitten off or any other injury, they will die. She's trying to breed bees like that, and she's learning ways to spread those genetics. So she became president of the Kentucky Bee Breeders. Purdue had some problem with their program, so she continues it, to supply the Heartland Honeybee Breeders Association in the absence of Purdue. And then the guy, John, I can't remember his name, but anyway, he retired. So the new guy may not be really big about this mite maul or mite biter thing. We don't know yet, but she's also finding better results with the feral bees, and so she's got this crew of guys that goes out and finds feral colonies, and she tests them for mite biting.
Ankle biters.
Cool.
Ankle biters, yeah. And if you want to help the bees plant pollinator forage and don't use so many chemical pesticides. So I like to have a little entrance in the top. This is the inner cover. This is a pollen patty. I picked this one because it's kind of small, but it's doing what it's supposed to. I try to take a frame out away from the activity so that I'm not what they call roll the bees when I lift it up.
Is that pollen patty to feed the bees?
Yeah, and here's some natural pollen, but I don't know whether it's fresh or whether it's old and they're not even using it. They only fill the pollen halfway full.
How come you don't have yourself all garbed up like we see on TV?
Well, I want to be able to see things. This is some capped honey, and this is some capped brood, worker brood. So if they were, I like bees that I open the hive and they just kind of look at me or ignore me. I
Yeah.
don't like the ones that come after me. And the worst ones will like be what's called pinging you and following you to your car. I don't want those bees. I got one colony like
Pick
that.
and choose what kind of bees you get.
Well, you might be able to see a little bit of larvae in there, little worm-like things, the white spots.
In the partially filled ones?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Towards the center.
Yep.
You see some? So that's about it. This is a medium frame, and this is what the bees do when
Have
you
built.
give them room. And they build the bigger cells, which is drone comb, quite often when they have a choice.
And what is the whiter? Is that,
This is just newer.
oh, it's just a,
Yeah, they walk on this, and it gets a little dirtier. And when they raise bees in it, they have 5 stages of larvae, and they have cocoons and silk that's left behind, and that makes it darker too.
but is that the honeycomb?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's age and traffic that darkens it. The new stuff is white. So I think we've just about shown you what there is to see here. I'm not going to look for a queen. I didn't notice any drones. So I'll just put it back together and turn it over to the garden.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Eric. This has been awesome.
Yeah.
Seems to know anything whenever I ask somebody. So, do you have any updates on that?
I could tell you a whole lot about it. There's a guy named Tom Theobald he's got serious health issues, and he's trying to go out with a flame talking about neonicotinoids. And he was a 25-year president of the Boulder Beekeepers.
Okay.
And he talked about times when there was forage all the way out to I-25, and it's been taken over by development. But anyway, his big thing is the people that are selling the neonics call themselves the crop protection industry. But there's a whole 95% of the use is in seed treatments, which is not considered to be a regulated use of a pesticide.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're planting treated seeds, and the farmer's told, you want crop insurance?
You have to use that.
Buy the treated seed. You want crop insurance. So they planted it, and the dust from the planting would drift off the field. It would go in the soil and the water and do invertebrates harm. and it would persist, and it would drift off the field into the wild forage for native bees as well as honeybees. But the crop protection people will tell you, well, we just want to get those root borers in the early stages, and by the time it's systemic, it goes through the whole plant, pollen and nectar. But they say, oh, by the time it gets there, it's diluted down to it's not harmful. Guess who studies the harm?
Oh, the people that pay them, yeah. Exactly.
The pesticide industry
Of course.
tells the EPA that we did some studies and the lethal dose for 50% is so and so, and we didn't see that. Well, we're not studying the long-term effects. So some people were pressuring the big box stores to not sell neonics. And I've heard some store came out boldly with them this year saying, neonics, EPA approved.
Okay.
That's not right. The EPA let the crop protection industry tell them that it didn't kill half the insects.
Yeah.
And they got conditional registrations, and they've never done a good study.
All right, so we have Butter, the president of the Grange, to tell us about the garden, the community garden here.
Yeah, I was just talking to one of our garden members. The last year with the pandemic has been a little crazy. Trying to operate our community garden at the beginning of the pandemic, I was emailing with like Health and Human Resources, and they're like, no community garden, because that was at the point where they're like, you can't touch metal surfaces, you can't be together. But our group came together last year. We were able to operate the garden in its full capacity last year, basically communicating only online like strangers in the night, which is not how we tend to operate, because this garden is a communal garden, which is a little different from how community gardens operate these days. A lot of times community gardens anymore will have, you'll buy your individual plot, right? So you basically like rent a little piece of land and do your own thing. Here, we have all this space and all of our members work it together. We all work the same space. We all share in the food. We all share in the work. And one of the big objects, the reason why we do that is so that we can create a real sense of community. And we're getting back to that. It used to be pre-pandemic, we'd have monthly potlucks. We'd have work days together. It was really about building a group that works together, that enjoys being together. And I tell you, last year, I missed it so much. I've only been out of like the vaccination cage for like 2 weeks now. So I'm still kind of new to being around humans, but I've missed just the interaction, what it feels like to sit with another person, to like talk and to learn together. And that's another one of the really great things about our communal space, is that we get to share each other's knowledge. So we've got Eric and his beekeeping knowledge. We've got one woman who is an absolute expert with ornamental plants. I'm kind of like a veggie person. I come from a farming background. So like as the community garden director, I don't have to know everything. All of the people that are part of this garden really contribute. And it's everyone's space. What you see here is a product of the people who come out here and build it together. I think I want to show you the soil here. So we operate here with a permaculture model. We don't practice it perfectly, but we try to think of the entire space and what goes on in the space. We try to benefit the insects and the mammals and the people here, as well as operate the garden. And we consider our main resource our soil. I think you're all familiar with what the soil in Colorado is like. Have you all turned over the clay clods in your garden? Check this out. This is what permaculture does. So we're always thinking about, how do we build the soil? How do we benefit the soil? How do we not rob the soil? So we do a lot of different things, including the sheet mulching. We layer in llama poo is our favorite, alpaca or llama poo, and the cardboard and the straw. We rotate our crops every year. Everything we do is to protect this. Because how often do you see soil that looks like that in Colorado?
Where do you get the llama poo from?
There's a local place. We've been getting it from a place that I think it's off of Federal and 120th up there. We used to get it from a farm in Golden, but you can generally look on like Free Cycle, that type of place, and they'll advertise. And really, they just want you to come pick it up. So if you bring a truck and a shovel and a tarp, you just go get it.
I have a farm sanctuary that I volunteer with, so they have llamas. So if you ever need some.
Yes, please. Let me get your email because we definitely in the fall we definitely will want some.
That sounds good.
I can't get over this soil. I can look at this forever because look, they talk about ideal soil looking like chocolate cake. This is it, and this is why we get to grow the most beautiful produce here. Obviously, our volunteers come out here and they work really hard every week to keep it looking as good as it does. Everybody chips in, but then the extra benefit is we get to go home with the finest produce that you're ever gonna find. It's so delicious. And we also share as much as we're able to with Fish, the food pantry across the street. So we feed our neighbors as well. And we feel like that's an important part of our mission. Let's see.
Do you want to tell us what we're growing?
Yeah, we've got some really special crops here too. We engage in a lot of seed saving, which is important, right? And we also grow some special crops. This one right here is a winter squash, and it doesn't have a name, which annoys some people that it doesn't have a name, but it's important that it doesn't have a name because this squash is actually native to our area. It's been grown in the northern part of New Mexico for basically all of recorded history, probably longer. And the reason it doesn't have a name is because this seed has never been sold to a commercial seed company, which would benefit the seed company, not the native people that have been growing this and eating this and feeding their families with this forever. So by growing we call it no-name squash here, we actually are benefiting the genetic line down in New Mexico. What we do is collect the seeds here, send them back down there. They breed with what's down there and it strengthens their line. They send us more seeds.
The little bunny is coming to listen.
That little bunny is coming to take our corn, is what it's doing. It's like, I love corn. It's my favorite.
That's why we've got the cartons there.
Yeah, it's always the corn. So we've got some special crops like that. We've also got, you can see it's kind of overtaken with dill at this point, but we've got several different varieties, cultivars of garlic growing. And that's one of our favorite crops here because we planted in November. It's one of the first things to emerge in the spring, which is good because everyone in Colorado wants to garden come March. But what's the weather like in March, right? So we've got some early season satisfaction with the garlic, and fairly soon, it's late this year, but fairly soon we'll be harvesting the garlic. So that's one of our big group events is to harvest the garlic together in July. And then everybody takes home their share, and we save some seeds and plant it again in November. So it's very like a whole year process. And I have a niece who's 10 years old, and she swears that all the best crops are the ones like birthday presents, the ones that you get to dig out of the ground. So like the garlic or potatoes, she really likes corn too, anything you get to open up. And I do feel like that's one of those things that's really fun is the garlic. To come out here and you don't know what's going on underground, but it always comes out beautifully, the heads of garlic here, because the soil, again, our soil is delicious and wonderful. We get some heads of garlic that are this big. Even the farmer that we get them from is shocked by how big the garlic grows here.
All the llama poo.
Yeah, it's all the llama poo. It's really wonderful. And then our other fertilizer, this garden is entirely organic, no spray, and also no till, which is one of the ways we maintain our soil. Exactly. I was a fan. Like, I come from a farming family from Iowa, and I had never heard of no-till agriculture before I came to the Grange. But really, the proof is in the pudding. So I've started doing this at my own house, doing sheet mulching in my garden beds. My soil looks like that now. And previously, my soil, no matter what I did to it, still looked like clay clods. So these methods really, really work. So one of the other things that we use for fertilizer out here is a plant called comfrey, which we've got over there in our medicine garden. We've got a medicine garden, we've got a pollinator garden, we've got the 3 main beds, we've got some berries, rhubarb, we've got a raised bed over there that is for people of all abilities to come in here and enjoy the garden. let's do some walking. Carnation, about 15 years old. You would kind of think that with this big property and the historic building, that there was a victory garden here in the very least, but we really can't find any evidence that that was the case. We don't know. Do you know, Eric?
No.
Yeah, so about 15 years as it is now. I've been with the garden for about 6 years, and at the time I came in, the previous group had all kind of gone their own ways, and it really out here, it kind of looked like a vacant lot. You know, all of the weeds were like shoulder high. You really couldn't see the garden beds. So it's been a process of building, and because we have such great volunteers coming out here, step by step we've been able to regenerate it. And I'm really proud of the way it looks right now. I think it's beautiful out here. And I think that what we're doing out here, we try to maintain a vision of doing things that are worthy of this historic building. Because I think, are you guys familiar with the Grange organization? Anybody? So the Grange is a national organization. It was started to protect the rights of farmers, which originally Broomfield was all farms, right? And currently the National Grange Organization still does that. We're a little different because we're squarely seated in suburbia now. So we're more of a community center, but still that's the origin of the Grange. And our charter was in 1898, and this building was built in 1916 and has been in the same place that entire time. Really only the depot, you guys know the depot? Used to be right there. Train depot, right? It was the train depot. It used to be right there. So really only the depot is older, and the Grange has been here since before Broomfield was even a city. Originally, this street was the city of Broomfield. There's the mercantile and the bank, the grain silos, and the Grange and the depot. And that's pretty much it. And this building has been here throughout Broomfield's history. And I don't know about you guys, I was born here, I grew up here. I didn't know about the Grange. I think I'd recognize the grain silos by sight, but I never knew about the Grange. And I actually came here through my mechanic. My mechanic was like, yeah, it's this great place, and they've got a garden, and I came to one meeting and I never left. Which is kind of what it's like, because you get excited about the building. We've got a class going in there right now. Our main income, the way we maintain a historic building, is through rentals. And we're always looking for volunteer work. So if you're interested in history or beautiful things for the garden, talk to me. We like new members. So we've got a class in there right now, but if we're able, after they leave, peek inside the building, because it's just what you'd imagine a historic building would look like. If you think of like the old-fashioned kind of schoolhouse look, the main hall is gorgeous. It's got the wood floors and the high ceilings and the charm. And I think everybody who sees that building just falls in love with it. I know that I did. Did you too? Yeah, It's a special place. So our efforts now are maintaining that building. In, let's see, 2018, we are officially designated a historic landmark, which helps us preserve the building. But its status isn't insured. The state owns this property. So we need our volunteers, we need our income to keep it going here. And we really would like for this building to be here for another 100 years, for another generation, and really honor that legacy and have it here as kind of a living piece of history in Broomfield. You can't really see the garlic, but it's in here. These guys are the garlic. This is dill that all came up from volunteer last year. But you know, I always joke that we don't turn away a volunteer. We've got horseradish back there in the corner, the pollinator garden behind it. Over here, we've got sunflowers. We always like to have a row of sunflowers at the edge. Our tomatoes, nasturtium, marigold, watermelon, cucumber, zucchini. The ones that are flowering right now are potatoes. We've got peas and chard over there. And then we try to think of the traditional Three Sisters planting. So we've got squash and corn and beans over in that corner with our no-name squash. We've got fruit trees here as well. and part of our long-term plan is to have more fruit trees, in fact, an orchard. So it's just a matter of like building here one step at a time and having a really long-term vision of what this place will look like. And eventually we would like to have this property look like a little green hug in the center of Broomfield. So we'll be adding in landscaping and trees. We've got another Boy Scout coming in this month who will be building an entrance trellis for us. Eventually we'll put in a fence line around the irises. We're gonna build a grape arbor over the patio. Got so many plans and so few hands. But it's really exciting to see this place grow, to see the garden grow, and to see what we can do together. Because maintaining a historic building and a property this large, it takes a lot of hands and a lot of hearts. Like no one person could do this. So I'm always so grateful for the friends I've met here and the people that come back here week after week and maintain this place.
So how often do you water?
Water?
Well, I think so.
Yeah, we've got, our irrigation is run off of solar, and so it comes on every day.
And those are just soaker hoses.
Yeah.
And are those peas over there, the tall ones that
Yeah.
have white flowers?
Yeah. Y'all are taking peas home, right? I feel like I have to like
Are they
threaten
ready?
people to take food home. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's so strange. Year after year, we've got all the food out here, and people get so focused on weeding. It's always the weeding. I won't lie to y'all. It's always the weeding. People get so focused that they come out here and weed, and I know they go home without food. Makes me mad. I'm gonna start threatening people with vegetables. But it always works out in the end because, like I said, we do donate to fish. So about this month, I'll start going through at the end of every week, collecting everything that's excess and run it over across the street to fish.
Please take some dill. We
Yeah,
have
if y'all want
a little
some
bit.
dill, take some dill home because when we dig our garlic up, this dill is coming out. There's really no way to save it. So if you want to take some dill home, take it. And while you're at it, if you take some, take off these flowering heads. Take off like 10 or 15 of them. But really, honestly, take some dill.
Last year was fighting bindweed all year.
Oh gosh.
This year, they got a head start on it. And part of their system is to get down in a bed and lay down cardboard to keep bindweed and other weeds, and then put compost and soil and straw on top, mulch. And it's working.
It is.
How about thistles? I have some thistles. I let my lawn die, so I want to go ahead and xeriscape it. And boy, I have been aerating my lawn with my little screwdriver, so just trying to get those thistle roots out. But I guess and it's like they're like this long, and then they pop up again.
Yeah, a lot of the weeds are really tough to tackle in this situation. It's really because they were built to survive. They like disturbed soil, which is one of the reasons why we don't till out here. When you till, you're exposing all of those weed seeds to sun and air and water. And in a situation with disturbed soil, which is what we as humans do, a lot of the things that we think of as weeds are what they call pioneer species. So they're actually the first plants to come into the area. And if you can kind of reframe the way you think of weeds, these pioneer species actually start the process of regenerating the soil. They prevent erosion, wind and water erosion, start adding nutrient contact back to the soil. And there are like other layers of species that come in. Eventually you'll get shrubbery, eventually you'll get trees, and then there's like a tertiary, like apex environment that happens. So weeds are made to survive. They're rough. And yeah, in the beginning, when I was first here, the bindweed, you pick a little spot like this corner, you come to weed over here the next week, the bindweed, and I'm not exaggerating, it would be this high, thick like a pillow. My niece, when she was little, she used to have a game called Flop in the Bindweed. So much bindweed out here, and I have cried over bindweed, I'm not embarrassed to say. But about 2 years ago, we discovered that if we put the cardboard down, in addition to the straw, we tried wood mulch. We were really able to get a hold on the weeds. And it's been a system we've kept in place, and I'm really proud of the way it looks out here. I was teaching at a plant conference over the weekend that's on a farm, a functioning farm. And they have way more weeds than we did. I was like, Grange ain't so bad. We're good. Any
So
more
you would
questions?
suggest putting some cardboard down, putting straw down, maybe some wood mulch, so the straw is not going to be blown in.
Yeah,
blown
you
away?
really have to wet it down. That helps
Okay.
a lot. But yeah, that process alone, what I'm seeing out here, and mind you, our volunteers have been working so hard to pick the weeds this year, but it's at the point now where it really doesn't, it's not a point of total frustration. Whereas it was before, the bindweed was so bad that it would just swallow our crops, like our crops would disappear. And so we've been able to get a little bit of a hold of it.
Have you used the bindweed mites from CSU?
No, part of the problem is that those need to be mowed frequently. So it would help out here. They need to be mowed about once a week to be like tossed around, and it would take maybe 10 years to see a difference. And the first time it came up, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, we had some volunteers who objected to using intervention, and so we voted it down. But it's really just a matter of, you know, what group we have out here as volunteers, because like I said, this place operates on the people who are here, and so it's really a mix of the people, and we decide most everything by vote. My job as the director is really just to kind of keep us all on the same page. Any more questions?
All right.
I don't know the specific names, like Zang. What's Zang?
Adolf Zang was one of the first peoples here. So this street was originally called Zang Spur. So Zang was one of the founders in Broomfield. Coors was out here too. So one of the grain silos is named Coors.
So that's why we have Zhang's garden.
Yeah, so at some point we decided to name our gardens, and this middle bed we named after Zang because this was Zang's Spur. And actually Adolf Zang met in this building. Like if you think of the history of Broomfield, early city council meetings were held here, weddings were held here. The Grange was actually responsible for bringing postal service to Broomfield. So if you think about, like, historically speaking, Grange has really always been the heart of this community, which is why it's so special. I just love, I never thought I'd be a history person, but I fell in love with the building, and now it's just so interesting to me to think that, like, the founders of Broomfield were in that same place where we go in and walk. And I imagine, like, during World War II, it was a big thing to have dances here. So they'd have the music inside, and everybody would come together once a week on Saturdays and dance. And some mornings when I go in there and the building's quiet, I can just, it's like you can feel the magic of those people still in the building. I feel like it's got a heartbeat. I may be a little sappy, but I'm in love with it.
I think they had a train that ran from Denver to Broomfield, and they named Zang Spur, I think, was the name of the train, the tracks that came to Broomfield.
Yeah, the train is actually part of the reason why the Grange was formed as an organization to protect farmers against the interests of the railroad. And that's one of the reasons they bought a double lot for the Grange, was to keep it away from the railroad. There was, like, well, actually not was, to this day, there's even like a secret handshake with the Grange. If you're going to go to, like, the state conference and the official meetings, there's a secret handshake and a password. And it was all because those things were needed to protect the farmers and their interests against anybody who was trying to take advantage of them. So today those things feel a little antiquated, but they have an origin, they have a reason.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Butter. I appreciate you giving us our tour here and telling us about the Grange. It's very interesting stuff, so we appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Butter.
Basically full, and we turn it a couple times a week. It needs to be aerated and stuff, and kept, like, moist as a wrung out sponge. And so it just eventually decomposes down. It's crazy because we start with, like, a full bin, and by the time it decomposes down, there's only about, like, that much compost. So it really breaks down a ton. So I feel sad because people in our compost club are like, can I take home compost? And I'm like, we don't actually have that much to give by the end. I'm sorry. Like it's all gone then. So we've got some other bins here that just have some good looking compost. These are pretty much almost done or nearly done. You can, if you're composting at home and you're not sure, you can just kind of grab it, take a whiff of it, and if it still smells kind of rotten and stuff, you're like, oh, not really done yet. Let it cook a little more, keep turning it, keep watering it and stuff. So yeah, we've got like 2 more bins here that we're working on cooking. And then we just recently built this leaf hold area where we're going to basically collect leaves for our compost club. So in the fall, we'll probably ask Sustainable Broomfield members to just bring us their bags of leaves and dump them in our leaf hold, and then hopefully that's going to tide us over with enough leaves to sustain our compost club for the whole year then. So that's kind of how our compost club is running. Anybody can join. We have about 80 members right now, so a lot of people participating in it. That's about it. Any questions or anything on it? You guys might all be members, so you probably know everything anyway. So thanks for listening to the spiel. But yeah, if you guys ever have questions, feel free to just email me, and I can answer those for you. And
more members.
We could have a few more. I'm feeling like we might need to cap it at about 100 people because we're basically almost full with all 6 bins here. So we'll see if we're starting to get overflow and need to cut it off. But I'm looking at around 100 right now, so as our cap. But that's about it. Anything else? Well, thank you guys so much for coming tonight. We're going to go up and we'll have our drawing for our little prize basket, and then let you guys head home.